Shall we make a start?
William, James.
Good to see everyone. Welcome to this meeting of what's called the Scrutiny panel. Housekeeping, as usual, we're not expecting the fire alarm to sound this evening. If it does, please leave the building through the fire exits and meet at the fire assembly points. Officers will direct us to that. The meeting will be video recorded. We've got this doing that. And will be uploaded to the council's website. There are no members of the public, but they can opt out if they want. They can also film if they want to within reason. I don't need to tell you all that. And there's more information on the website. There we go. So we move swiftly on to item 1. Apologies, we have apologies from the councillor Finlock and Councillor Dedier and all the other chairs are full. That's a good start. Declarations of interest then. Does anyone have any declarations of interest they need to make? No, obviously if you think of them later, you can stick your hand up. On to item 3 then, the minutes. So we move to the minutes of the meeting from the 14th of July. You may wish to abstain if you weren't here. Do I have a proposer and seconder that I can sign those minutes? Thank you, Steve and Alan. All agreed? Lovely. There's no public participation because there's no public. Item 5 is my chair's report. I don't have too much except to say welcome back after what feels like quite a long break since our last successful meeting. We've got quite a full agenda tonight, as you would have seen, because obviously we sadly had to cancel the last meeting, and so we've rolled some of that over, and hopefully nothing's got lost in the cracks. I don't think it has. But we've got a lot to get through tonight. Other than that, nothing from me, so we go straight on to item 6, which is update from task and finish groups, which I think we have 2 of. Now, so the first is the One Horton Heath task and finish group. James, can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. We have one outstanding item, which was stress testing, which of course is a particularly hot subject now. And we've been, Andy Smith has been suggesting we did that in different ways, but I think we put it back on the straight and narrow that will be as we requested at the last meeting. This is taking account of interest rates and house price movements and mortgage rates and all the rest of it. Both for the purchase and for the rented sector as it relates to One Horton Heath. So we've got that date in our diary, but we've just discovered that actually the date doesn't work for Steve, so we may have to change the date. But it's back on track, and of course this has been going on since May, and we really hope we'll put it to bed in November at least.
Big thank you. I agree we need to get that done, because it's going to be stress tested one way or the other, and it would be nice if we were one step ahead of the Chancellor's attempts to stress test it, wouldn't it?
Yeah. We're hoping for a greater degree of consistency as well.
Super. The second task and finish group we had in flight was development management, which Steve is leading.
Yes, thank you. Well, as my old headmaster never said in my end of term report, making solid progress. We've had a couple of Teams meetings and 2 meetings with Andy Granfield and his assistants, whose name I confess has completely slipped my mind. Nick, somebody? That's him. And we are now trying to get together for another quick Teams catch up and then probably another meeting with Andy to cover off things like Section 106 agreements and adoption of roadways and things like that. So I think, providing we can actually get diaries together, reporting back to the next meeting should be entirely possible. And if not, then I will just fudge around it and come back in December.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Any questions on task and finish? No, lovely. Let's go on to item 7 then, which is the corporate service performance. And I'm going to ask Lewis to introduce that.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, first things first, this refers to Q1. So perhaps some of the layers due to the meeting was cancelled, so it's a little bit out to date now, but still there's some useful lessons to learn from the report. The first thing I suppose to highlight is the missing financial information, which is covered in the report, and more detailed information will come to that next week, as mentioned. In terms of what's in there, changes from the KPI review haven't been implemented as yet in this report. It will be for Q2. Important to note. I think overall, as the summary gives, Cllr's performance is good, considering a lot of the challenges that we're facing, particularly with increasing demands, report details. I think the percentage of invoices, paragraph 6 was pulled out in particular, mainly because Q1 was a real dip in performance, but it's good that the fact that the report is in a bit late gives us the opportunity to show the progress, which has been showing it over the summer months, which is a positive. That's been through some good hard work, particularly in registration, which is great. Cost of living crisis, as mentioned, that's continued to be part of our thinking and will be reflected in future reports, I'm sure, more acutely now. And then recruitment and retention seems to be the common subject that continually comes up in this report. Still an issue, and still something that's very much priority. The revised people strategy, as mentioned, focus on that. And I think that's everything I wanted to highlight. Probably everything else is in the report, so just send a question through.
Lovely. Thank you. Any questions or comments on that item? So,
I wasn't listening to the very beginning, so this is the KPI report we're looking at. Good. Sorry, I seem to have switched off for a second. I'm concerned that 1.6, the KPIs for the NO2, the nitrogen stuff, is red in Q1. I know we had a long period without any reporting, but it looks like it hasn't. Is that red, or is that another NA? So I'm on page 19, quarterly scorecard.
So the April and May are not available. But June
Wait to me.
Yeah.
which is red, has a red report rather than a red.
Okay, so May and June are not available. Did you say?
April and May, sorry.
April and May.
But June is available.
But June is available. So was April and May not available because the site was still not working, or is there another reason?
No, that's correct. Yeah, the same problems with the analyzer.
Right, okay, and that's all fixed now.
Was fixed, I believe now, not working.
It's fixed, but it's not working.
Yeah, so since the report.
So, sorry, Chase. So I had a conversation with James Howard today, the executive environment. He assures me that we now have a month's worth of complete data and the station is working. Because I know that I think the last 2 meetings that I have attended this meeting, we have been attempting to get the thing working. It is now working. Change the PI because excuse me, the PI related to that station. So what we decided to do is include all of the stations. So we're actually getting a more representative set of data across the borough rather than one site in particular, and it enables us to report some data rather than turning up to say, sorry, we can't make this. All of the systems, all of the stations are now working. So the data we're getting is a complete set of data.
So that red is for the entire borough then, not just for the one that's not working or is now working. I'm sorry, I'm confused now.
these are the old
Yeah,
KPIs.
I think that's what's called
These are the old KPIs.
Yeah.
So, sorry, so that would have been a snapshot for that one, because it occasionally sprang to life and then it disappeared again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we thought, enough's enough. We're relying on one when actually it needs to be borough-wide. That just makes more sense.
So where is the borough-wide data in this report, or isn't there?
It's not, that'll come to the next.
So that's going forward.
Indeed, yes.
Okay. So I get the reasoning, I get your thinking, but if it's borough-wide, does that mean then that we're averaging out? So if there's one area that's really, really bad, let's say Southampton Road, for instance. Yes. So let's say Southampton Road is really, really bad and everywhere else is pretty good. We're going to see a green or amber, but we're not going to see the red that is for Southampton Road. So it's kind of masking what's really going on.
Yes, is the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
However, we've still got the PI for each individual one.
Right.
So that data clearly will be sharing with Councillor Cook, you would expect us to, because these things, you know, rather than just focusing on one site for a small area, if that's a problem, we'll still know it's a problem, and that won't be a close regard to see. That's not the point.
No.
But I just, as I say, two things. Firstly, we had so many problems with our site, and we kept coming back with no data for you. That wasn't helpful. So what we decided to do is we'll go with what we've got. We'll show you an average. So if one of the sites falls off, or two of the sites, we've still got some data. And then within that, if there's a particular problem, of course we can share it with you.
Okay. So we used to get that reported to us at ELAC. And I don't think it's come to ELAC for quite some time. No, it hasn't, has it? No. So
I was just going to say, we had this discussion about when we were looking at KPIs and sort of updating and making sure they were more relevant and everything else. So we thought that actually it would be really helpful actually to have a borough-wide KPI for activities actually, so we could capture all the information and think about. But also I was very keen, and I know that everyone else was, that actually each of the LACs would be able to see that data, the ones that are relevant to themselves, because it's clearly very important, not only to yourselves, but also residents that you're representing. So yes, you will get that information coming to LACs. We were very conscious, as has just been said, that what we were doing was just reporting back no data to go and tell you what's going on at all. Okay. And that's really not helpful at all to anybody in the borough, let alone in your individual LACs. But that machine has been a problem for a long period of time, unfortunately, which has been very difficult to sort out. But I can assure you that what we were trying to do with this new data set was give an overall view of the air quality in the borough, but also then that breakdown will be able to be shared across the borough, but also shared within the LAC, so you'll get that information.
Okay, so what will be the trigger for it to come to our next ELAC? Because we haven't seen it in ages, have we?
I haven't seen it since May.
No, because the machine wasn't giving us any information to be able to report to you, really, to be fair. But yes, you will be getting them you should be getting them on a regular basis now. The machine's working, but yeah, definitely within your team's meeting cycle, you should be getting those coming back to you.
So whatever the previous reporting arrangements were, that's what the previous reporting arrangements should be moving forward. But we kept having to turn up with the latest good excuse, basically. And genuinely, the guys and girls tried very hard to get the thing fixed, but it was a multitude of problems. And it was almost like an IT thing. We fixed the thing, and then it chased the problem somewhere else. And in the end, we did actually think, should we just
abandon it?
Yeah, scrap it and try and get some grant funding for a new station. That's very expensive. So you'd only do that once you've received absolute minimum. Anyway, it's now working about a full month later. Hopefully, everything will be fine, and we'll just start reporting to all the state.
Out of interest, the other LACs, have you been receiving the data? No, it's all of us, is it?
We haven't.
Yeah.
We haven't asked, but we haven't used it.
We used to get it quite regularly.
You're going to share with the team, aren't you?
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have previously had reports on the air quality management areas come here, so I put a little note and maybe something I put back on the work programme, but I suggest not soon, since there's a big gap in the data, but perhaps towards the end of this municipal year, so March or something, once there's a bit of data there, we could take a borough-wide picture there.
It used to come up at public meetings at ELAC quite regularly with some issues. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Two quick questions which bracket Sara's 1.5 and 1.7. 1.5 clearing of fly tipping. Now, I'm not that interested in whether it's red or green. It's nice that it's done. But do we have any figures on prosecutions for fly tipping? Because catching people and publicising it's a very good way to try and stop it. And the second one is a question I've asked before, actually, which is noise nuisance requests responded to on time. Responding and resolving are different things. And having someone turning up and sucking their teeth and saying, yes, it is a bit loud, isn't it? Isn't frankly helpful. But if actually something gets done, it is. So again, reporting KPIs are all very well that you've sort of attended something. But actually, have you resolved the problem? Have you actually taken the action that's necessary to follow up? So I think 1.5 and 1.7 sort of join together in a way on that. But actually, it's about resolution and follow through rather than just turning up and looking nice.
So in terms of the first question, I would say the information is available in terms of service level. Information is being monitored. I suppose it was decided we didn't include it through the KPI review from memory. So it's data that is available, it could be brought forward. So on 1.7, yeah, it's responses, as you say, rather than resolution. Again, I'm presuming, I don't know for sure, but I can check that data is available. It could be data that could be shared, yeah, as an outcome rather than a first response.
Chairs, I'll provide a little bit more detail for you, Councillor Broomfield. So, if we deal with the fly tipping issue first, I think for many a long year we were superb as a council with clearing up fly tipping, not so good in terms of prosecuting, because it's a difficult thing to do actually to prove anything, and it's very, very time consuming. And because of the way that the council was configured, we actually had 5 different teams in response to, it comes in via the CSC, then it's passed to local area services, they have a look at it, then it's direct services, they potentially have a look at it, and legal get involved, environmental health get involved. And basically there were lots of, if you like, lots of potential for a failing in the system. So we set up a project to pull all of this together to make sure that there was processes in place, protocols in place, knowledge articles, all that kind of thing, to make sure that when we had a report, we were able to follow it from start to finish. Now, you've got to understand that we haven't suddenly got, so we've got that now in place. What we haven't got is capacity to investigate everything that comes through. But what we have got the ability to do is to pick either the low-hanging fruit or the really serious ones, and we've got some hotspots that fall to the data around, and we're looking at, we've secured funding for some portable cameras. So we are looking at trying to get some, and I think we've got one just about to conclude, and because what we want is a couple of successful prosecutions, and then we can splash it everywhere, so that this whole thing about, I think the phrase I used many years ago was "come and have a dump in history," because we were great at clearing it, but we weren't good at following it up. So that is something that we are addressing. We've now got a protocol in place. I think we're about to build our first successful one, and there are more in the pipeline. But we can't do everything because we would be incredibly busy and we'd be rattling it in terms of resources. So I think that's the understanding. In terms of in terms of fly tipping. Sorry, the second part of the question was.
It's about resolving noise nuisance issues.
Yes, right. So in terms of resolving it, so there are the team will go out and investigate, and there are certain thresholds that have to be met in terms of being able to serve an abatement notice. So there are some people out there who are not happy because actually their noise issue doesn't meet threshold. We will put in noise monitoring equipment. There is a noise app which enables us to monitor flexibly. We get an awful lot of those. But if it would be helpful, more than happy to share with you a future meeting to see how many abatement notices we have actually served. I don't have that information with me, but the majority of our interventions, once people know we are involved, it tends to be okay. People don't want to be pursued. But there are some folk out there who are not happy because it doesn't meet the threshold, so sadly they have to live with a degree of inconvenience. But we do actively serve noise abatement notices. I'm aware of 2 that are currently ongoing with quite complex cases.
Okay, that's splendid.
It's something that we do.
Great, thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. Any more questions on the floor then? I only have one, I think, because I was also going to ask about the air quality one. 3.3.1, attendance at health work sessions is still showing red and is still starred as being affected by COVID-19 restrictions. So I wonder what the actual status of that is and whether we can expect it to get back to normal at any point.
Well, I was just going to add, Chair, that while many of us might feel that COVID is something that's in the past now, and I noticed that no one is wearing a mask here today, so that the majority, perhaps, of the population feel that we've moved on. The clients of that service are quite vulnerable, maybe elderly people, some with long-term conditions, and particularly sensitive and a little bit more wary about going into public places and engaging face-to-face with other people. So that might be the explanation for the low uptake still, even a long time after COVID.
Absolutely. I suppose my question there, and this might be one that's something to go away with, is whether we need to be looking at a different way of delivering those sessions. If no one's interested in turning up to them in their current form, whether that group needs to be served in a different way.
Sorry, Chair, there's a conversation being had this week on that very thing, actually. Because I think Dickens already alluded to, a lot of workplaces are still really there, people are working remote, which means we're not getting the throughput. But one of the things that we are aware of is we've had conversations recently with people like B&Q who may be interested in doing some contracting, so sending people to us. So we're trying to work out how within our existing resources, or the other conversation, that's part of business development function. So we had somebody who quite successfully sold services from the depot. Now that's tailed off a little for a host of reasons I'm not going to bore you. But we've got a number of product lines, a number of services we can trade. And that is just another example of something that we potentially offer more, maybe more so on a corporate basis, to get companies interested in, because it's all about well-being staff and hopefully, you know, increasing attendance and all of that stuff. So we're aware of it. We haven't got a hard and fast plan at this moment in time, but it's definitely on the radar, because people are just not, it's increasing, but it's not going to get back to its previous level. And the service has to wash its face. If we're going to invest a resource into it, we need to make sure that the outcome we're getting is worth the investment in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That sounds like one to watch then. So.
Sorry, I haven't had a chance to read all of this because we've had a power outage at home today, and I just. But I see 3.7 households in emergency accommodation is red. What's the story behind that?
Yeah. So it's, and I'm going from memory here.
Okay.
It's increased from something like 17 to 19. So it hasn't increased significantly, but it has increased. So I think the things you can probably expect, cost of living crisis. We sadly had some Ukrainian families presenting as homeless.
Are those ones that were with families? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because, and I think that situation is only going to get worse, because obviously, as Councillor Duguid knows, we're reaching the end of 6 months now, and speaking through the District Council's network, there is significant numbers of Ukrainian refugees who are now presenting as homeless. And so it's not just because of that, but it's a bit of a perfect storm of the cost of living crisis as well. So I think we can expect to see that number increase. And the team themselves are reporting a significant uptick in terms of their workload. Now, they're still managing to place people, and there is funding to do that. But the problem is there is less housing now in the private rented sector, which is where these people tend to go, and that's the push from government to get them there, because a lot of landlords are selling them, and so there is less of them, and that's why we're looking at like Hampton House and other potential longer term facilities within the borough. So we've got, so it's a facility that we are looking at developing out so that we can put people in temporary accommodation, which basically gives us our own stock in which to place people rather than having to put them in B&Bs or send them to areas elsewhere. So we're looking at how we can become more self-contained.
Okay, thank you very much.
Super. I think we can. Oh.
Sorry, it just occurs to me, and again, I think we've probably mentioned this before, but it would be useful on some of the figures to have a sort of national benchmark, because it's very nice to know that EC does something well or badly, but I've no idea how other comparable councils do it. So I know, for example, I think Fareham is a council that the government tends to use as a sort of benchmark. So, you know, just some of these figures you look at and you think, well, actually, do you know what? How do Fareham do it? How do Rugby or wherever it might be do it? Are we doing better than them or worse? It's always difficult to measure oneself against oneself. Much better to measure oneself against somebody similar. So is that something that the KPIs ever look at? And that's across a broad range of things, not just individual points, but actually a whole range of these reports.
Yeah, so I think that one of the challenges we've got alluded to is finding that comparison. So I think that where it's been useful to use is where we take a particular issue and we'll say, yeah, let's get some comparative data. But that requires quite a fair amount of data analysis. It's not a simple, sort of not every authority is measuring exactly the same thing, exactly the same way. There are some tools available to us that we do utilise to scrutinise the data a little bit more. But I'd say a sort of a holistic approach of comparative data would be quite hard to achieve. But I know through the conversation, through the KPI review, we were reviewing other performance to set some of the thresholds. So some of those indicators you'll see that red, green and amber, those statuses are set based on a kind of a national position. So we are trying to incorporate what's expected generally in Leeds to sort of set our own performance thresholds. But I'd say if there's a particular individual measure that we want to analyse a bit further, then that's probably a better route to go, rather than trying to accomplish all at once. Just the sheer amount of data that's involved. Yeah.
Just to develop a little bit on that, Lewis is right. In the days of best value, for those of us who are very old and they remember that, the national benchmarking was all the vote in the day. It was you were allocated to the like authorities. So I was at Southampton, people like Plymouth and Nottingham and people like that. So we had like comparators. Government subsequently have got less interested in benchmarking and less interested in the whole sort of regulation thing. So we do less of it, but there are some industry, Paul's area, for instance, the Association of Public Service Excellence, they have a lot of benchmarking data for frontline services in the area. There are some other benchmarking groups that are active through people like the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health Officers and other various professional bodies. So we could benchmark some of this data. It'll be a little bit limited. Some of the authorities, some of the data I've seen, I wouldn't say they're like authorities, but there is some benchmarking data. So it wouldn't be exhaustive and it wouldn't be for all services, but I'm sure we could do some of this stuff to give you a bit of context, because when you see a number, all you see is 1 month to the next, and you think, oh, well, that's okay, or that's not okay. But on a national context, it could be wonderful or it could be not wonderful. So there is some, we could do something, but it probably wouldn't be exhaustive. Some councils just do not benchmark, don't want to benchmark, and others are very
Well, it would be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's something to think about as we develop the performance data and the systems around performance data in particular. I'm mindful it's still quite a manual process and we need to get some systems in place to take some of the staff work out preparing it. But at that point, actually having those data feeds come in for comparisons could be really useful and powerful. So that's definitely one to put a pin in. But I think we've well and truly noted that report. So so we'll move on. Thank you, Lewis. You're welcome to leave. Item 8 then is our briefing on the Environment Act. And I believe Gail is going to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors and colleagues. It's good to be here tonight, and what I want to do is, this is an information briefing, and just really to give you a bit of context about what's happening within the waste sector, both nationally and locally. And in terms of nationally, this is the Environment Act, and locally, it's what's happening across Hampshire, and there's some significant changes coming up in the next 2.5 years. Just as a little bit of context, it's always useful to look at where we are, in terms of how are we doing in terms of the waste hierarchy. And if we look at this inverted triangle, where we are at the moment is really in the bottom three sectors, which is that we're recycling and composting. You know, we're doing energy recovery because our refuse goes for recovery, and we still have a small amount of sort of disposal landfill where our bulky furniture items go as well. But where we want to go is further up that triangle. You know, we really want to be looking at that waste minimisation section, and you know, and ultimately getting to waste prevention where people aren't putting out those materials, and you know, and we are becoming net zero. But we've got a way to go. But the Environment Act and also the Joint Municipal Waste Strategy that recently came out, we signed off back in the summer, is helping us to get to that direction. And I think this is quite an important sort of triangle, really, because it's where we want to be. And you know, and that is going to support all of us in terms of, you know, climate change and our environmental emergency, but also management of resource as well. So what I want to just talk to you about, I hope you can see that okay, is sort of what are the local drivers for change? And one of the big things coming along is twin stream collections. And this is part of the joint, this is a recommendation from the Joint Municipal Waste Strategy. And this twin stream collections is a big positive. It's going to allow our residents to recycle more materials. So how many times have you been asked about yogurt pots, you know, cartons, things like that? So pots, tubs and trays, flexible film will all be able to be recycled. But in order to do that, we've got to make some changes. So what we're going to be doing is putting glass, getting rid of the glass box, and glass will go in the recycling bin. But what we're then going to do is take out the fibre. So that's paper and cardboard, and that will go into a separate bin. And this is going to be happening across the whole of Hampshire. It's not just Eastleigh. This is the whole of Hampshire. However, it is dependent. And it's dependent on the building of a new material recovery facility. So this is where our materials go to be recycled. And there's a planning decision being waited for, hopefully, in the next week or two. Because if we don't get that positive planning decision, it means that MRF won't be built. And therefore, we won't be recycling those pots, tubs and trays straight away, because we've then got to look at alternative, well, I'm assuming it'll go to appeal, and then we've got to look at, you know, if the appeal fails, we've got to look at alternative ways of doing this. So we are, I have to say, me and Paul, we are keeping everything crossed, aren't we, in relation to getting that approval. The MRF will take some time to build, and it's all going to be impacted on the, you know, the global economy, the pandemic, all those sorts of things. So it's not expected to come on stream until the summer 2025. But that's, in a way, quite a big positive, because we need to get our house in order. So we need to be, you know, sort of planning ahead, you know, getting our residents to reduce their waste, improve their recycling, working with our residents, because we need to get some behaviour change in place. We've then got to all the planning to get it implemented, and then we've got to make sure we can sustain what we're doing. So, you know, so it seems a long way away, 2.5 years, but it's not. It will go. You know, if you just think back to March 2020, the start of COVID, how quickly is that? So anyway, so those are our two key local drivers. The Environment Act supports a lot of this because it's putting focus on recycling. It's also got waste minimisation within the Act. It's putting focus on the producer in terms of packaging, and also we will be receiving funding from the producers. So we've got to make sure our recycling is of really good quality. We've also got coming along sort of new burdens funding. We're hoping that will come along sort of 24-ish, because we do need some external funding. And there's lots of other things happening, things like the deposit return scheme, you know, sort of, you know, get something back if you, you know, you recycle your glass bottle or tin. But in fact, glass isn't going to be in the deposit return scheme. It's only going to be plastic bottles and tin cans. It's being trialled in Scotland, so we're waiting to see what happens. So there's no guarantee it will, but it is in the Environment Act, so it should be implemented, but It's not going that well in Scotland at the moment. But the key thing about the environment is trying to standardise recycling collections. And Twin Stream will help with that locally. And I think also is that it's encouraging us to work together, because we're going to need a new container for fibre. And actually we're thinking, well, let's all have that same colour of bin across across the county. We can get economies of scale from a procurement point of view. So, it's also, driving us to work together a bit more. So we're wanting to standardise recycling collections that much more, because for people not doing food, they're going to be required to do food collections. So the positive is we're ahead of the game, and we've just rolled food collections out to flats as well. So we're, so everybody, pretty much everybody in the borough can recycle their food. But we've got some challenging targets: 65% recycling by 2035. 55% by 2025, and we're around about the 45% at the moment. So you can see the challenge. In terms of collection methods, it provides us with an opportunity to rethink our collection methods. We're going to have to do work differently because we're going to have a new container, and you can't put that fibre and cardboard in with your other materials, so they've got to be kept separate. Where residents can recycle an awful lot more, and we need to encourage residents to make sure their food isn't in their black bin. So potentially we could change how often we collect our refuse. We're currently fortnightly. Perhaps we could think about 3 weekly. I'm not saying these are all just suggestions, but these are all things that we've got the opportunity to change if we, if you yourselves with our residents, want to. So there's going to be a lot of work, and we'll be coming back to you in February with some ideas about how we could do, put forward some other solutions for you to consider. There's also another key driver is Hampshire, like everybody, is financially challenged. And they are putting forward proposals to changing our financial arrangements. So that means that they're going to be setting targets. This is not all agreed yet, but this is what is being proposed. So there will be targets set for us as a borough to reduce how much waste we generate. There'll be targets set for us to reduce our contamination, so the wrong items in a recycling bin, and if we don't, we will have a penalty, or there'll be a financial penalty imposed on us. So that's why, for me, it's very much about getting our house in order, so we don't get that penalty, and we're doing everything we can to reduce the financial impact of these changes, and I think that's really, really important. I don't know if you can see that; it's not clear from here. But we did a little analysis of sort of what's in the household waste bin. And if you can see
Food.
top left corner. Top left corner is food, and you can see there's still an awful lot. 21% of food is still going in the black bin. Obviously, that varies across the borough because some people recycle better than others. We're still getting some batteries, 0.7%. And sadly, we're still getting about 4% of paper and card in the refuse bin. And there's no need for that. We've got a small amount of plastic bottles, 1.66%.
So the percentages of what's in the bin?
Is what's in the black bin.
Of what's in the black bin. Yeah, so this
So when you say food, is 21.6 by weight or volume?
No, by volume.
By volume.
Yeah.
So as that's a very heavy material, the weight of it is significant. So you can get more food out of the back bin and into the food caddies. When you talk about reducing overall or residual waste arisings, that makes a significant impact because it would bring us down really low. And when we talk about financial penalties or the amounts of waste that we produce and everything else, that would have a positive impact.
Yeah. So
Sorry, and the volume of a plastic bottle that includes the air
That's the air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's squash.
If
but
you
it-
like,
yeah.
but if you like, the volume of plastic
Yeah.
doesn't weigh a lot. So whilst there's a large figure in there, it doesn't actually contribute in terms of weight, but it is actually a good material to get out. Yeah.
So in a nutshell, what's on the left could all be recycled. What's on the right, we've got a little bit of garden, we've got some electrical items you go to the recycling centre. But we're getting textiles, which is the bottom one. So, 2.16% of textiles, going in. We've got some, but what we have also going in, because they can't recycle it, is mixed and hard plastics and cartons. So when we get that MRF, those are the materials that will be able to come out. But what we want to do is to get more of those other materials, so the materials on the left-hand side, out. So it creates capacity in that refuse bin. So if we were to change collection frequencies, we know that there is space in that bin to do so.
I'm sorry, it's really possibly off point. How the hell do you get those figures?
Some people literally went through all the mirrors.
We do material
We do
analysis.
material analysis.
You don't do it every week.
No,
All of them, surely.
No, they do a random
Oh,
test.
a random sample.
So-
Everybody sifts through it.
Yeah.
You don't want that, Jim, do you, really?
Students tend to do it actually.
Thank you.
I mean, so every month we get some data, but of course then it's summed up at the end. And a couple of years ago, we did a waste composition analysis. So you sort of look at it as a whole.
Thank you, it's really interesting. I'm surprised, sorry.
Have you got that?
Yeah, I actually thought the mixed and hard plastics is less than I thought it would be.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but what you probably find there's a lot of what people, because a lot of people currently put plastics in their recycling.
Oh, right, okay.
And that's.
And then it's a
and then it's
disaster there.
contamination.
Yeah, okay. all
And
right.
we do have that as a significant problem, so. That's what was it. There was only an analysis done of black bins.
Right, okay.
Not the recycling.
Okay, thank you.
But for information, currently we're contamination, so the wrong items
Yeah.
in the recycling bin is about 17%.
Mm.
So this is against, you can see what I'm saying, we need to, improve what we're doing. So I just want to let you know, in order to implement twin stream collections, there's going to be obviously quite a few work streams, because we're going to have to audit all our properties, because we're going to have to check if there's going to be space for a new wheel bin. Potentially, it will impact on our vehicles. If the council decides it doesn't want to change its collection frequency, we've got to then think about actually, well, we need split bodied vehicles, because otherwise, we're going to have to procure even more vehicles. So the collection methodology is really key, and obviously how this impacts and what difference is it going to make in terms of emissions. It should, reduce these, and also it links very much into SBD quality places, because we're building all these new developments and bin stores, and they've got to have space for an additional container. And so we've been we're starting to have conversations with planning around that. But also it's a massive communications and behaviour change, and that behaviour change needs to start sooner rather than later. So moving forward, phase one is just really that we need to get I think that should be the other way around. I think it's January to July as opposed to. We need to establish a project team. We haven't paid on circulation at the moment, and that should hopefully have my feedback sort of early next week. Then putting together the team. We're looking at the options. We've got some round optimization going on at the moment. So we need to be looking at, and they're optimizing a number of options for us, so that we can provide you with, not just one way forward. And we've got to look at sort of the impact, on our recycling and residual arisings, as well as the environmental impact. Now, we're bringing a paper to Cabinet, and obviously yourselves. It was going to be January, but there isn't a Cabinet now in January, so it will be February. The next stage is sort of what I call sort of, is really, it's the getting, it's the implementation, it's getting the procurement, it's the financial modelling, because we've got to improve our systems. We were talking earlier about KPIs, but we need to be, we need our tonnage data so we can link that to our finances. And, there's a massive financial element sort of in this. As I said already, assessing our properties, we've got to then, we need at least a year of advance minimum to procure our vehicles, and there's going to be a massive demand for bins and vehicles. So we're probably saying actually a year and a half. If we're going to procure bins, where we're going to store them, that lane is going. So, how are we going to actually get all this happening? Are we going to, big bang, roll it all out at the same time over a sort of 2 week or 2 to 4 week period, or do we phase it in? So all these sort of key decisions need to be made. And I've put down, I think I've mentioned this already, is and we've got to look at new developments because again, as I mentioned already, that's going to be key. And getting our house in order is also about promoting our access bins, because people still have 2 bins, people still have bigger bins than they should have. So we've got to get those out of the way, and as I say, reducing that contamination. So going live again is looking at summer 2025. There will be again at all high level at the moment. It will be training, briefing staff, looking at our comms, but all those sorts of things, and obviously involving yourselves in that. And what will be key is embedding new behaviours and looking at resource for the CAC. This is the project board team. You may not see that well, but what we haven't wanted to do is have a councillor feedback group. So that because you're liaising with your residents all the time, so having representation from yourselves would be really helpful, so that so that you can also influence, as the process as it goes through, and sometimes we get very wrapped up in the detail, and we need that, external influence in terms of what's going on as well. But it's a frontline feedback group, so you can see it's a reasonably, it's going to be a programme board, but there's a lot of work streams. I'm not going to go through all those, but just sort of the key headings. It's service redesign, it's procurement, it's infrastructure, it's behaviour change, it's finance and data, and there's a whole load of work streams underneath all this. A lot of financial implications, and this is going to be very interesting, bearing in mind the current economic situation, because there will be a need for a project team. There's the vehicle replacement programme, I understand has been agreed, but we're talking a lot of money for containers, and if the oil prices go up, that price will increase. You can't do communications on the tube because people will need a direct mail, probably a couple, so that they do have, as well as obviously digital. We can't just rely on digital. But we will get some savings out of this in terms of our food waste, because food waste disposal is now going in to the contract. But I suppose I can't really emphasise too strongly. If we don't improve what we do, we will incur cost, and so and we will lose recycling as well. So and just in terms of if we're running at 18% contamination, and we don't improve that, we'll incur about £110,000 worth of cost. However, with the new materials that can be recycled, and if we can get our contamination down to 5%, we can get that then down to say 10%. Actually, that will go down to about 15-20. If we can get that down to 7, well, we're into zero cost. So those are the sorts of figures that we're sort of looking at.
What's our current income for recycling?
I
Okay,
couldn't give you the exact figure off the top of my head, but last year it was somewhere in the region of about 380,000.
okay, so that's about half the million. Okay, thank you.
So just really from a, there's a lot of opportunities related to this. We could, if we were to consider our collection methodology, we could really increase our recycling. And we could also reduce the waste we generate. We're already an exemplar authority, but we would be an even better exemplar authority in Hampshire, but across the country, because at the moment we're in the third quarter, but we need, we would be going up. It's an opportunity to reduce carbon, because potentially we could start looking at how we can better reuse our vehicles. And it could be a lot more cost effective. There are challenges with costs because we have to pay to get it off the ground, and there can be penalties. But it could work out cost effective. There's lots of risks. Don't plan to go through those massively with you. Planning delays, not reducing contamination, unable to distribute agreement with Hampshire, all these sorts of things that we, not doing anything, just remaining as is, which is not really, I don't think it's, it's not my decision, but it's not really a way forward. And not being able to procure containers because everybody else wants them on vehicles. So there's loads of risks and challenges, but at the, but potentially it's also quite exciting, and it's, a really interesting way forward, for the borough.
Thank you very much. I always really enjoy these presentations about waste. It's really
Always quite sad.
Waste down right.
That's really good. So let's do questions on this, Steve.
It's not a question, just to say that for those who didn't know, the MRF application comes to Regulatory Committee next Wednesday. Councillor House is on the committee, I'm on the committee, and Councillor Parker Jones is on the committee, so such fun.
That sounds even more fun than the
Sorry?
presentation. Even more fun than the presentation we just had.
It's the meeting's going to be an absolute cracker. There's another contentious one as well, so it's yeah. So bring some sandwiches.
Day out for everybody. Any more questions for James?
Yeah, the 200k for communication marketing to the population. What time frame is that? It seems to me to unlock this, a lot of it is education, getting people to be motivated to do the right thing, and perhaps be slightly shamed for doing the wrong thing. And I just wondered how that number seems rather a round number to be grabbed, and I wondered what stands behind it.
We was looking at it over a 30-month period. I was looking at it in relation to having, we need to better understand the barriers our residents are facing in terms of why aren't they recycling their food? So why aren't they? Why are things being put in the wrong container? So we need some focus groups or some form of survey to start us off. We also need, and again this is linked to the restructure that's going on within the service, is recycling officers. Council made a decision a number of years ago to not have any, but you do need that face-to-face contact with people on the doorstep, or having events, so that you can actually, engage with people so that they can understand where they're going wrong and provide them with that. And then, so it's work that needs to be planned over a 30-month period, but with significant spend in 2025 when we need to get information out to residents as well. So that is, but not all the spend is at the end, it needs to be phased in.
But it is about behavioural change. It is about real behavioural change.
It's also actually about waste minimisation. So there's also voice at the beginning saying don't buy it to waste it. So actually either use it if you like, don't let it go off and all that, and then don't go and repeat the same process the next week. Because there are so many people that go out there and buy the statutory things that they buy every week, but actually then throw a percentage of that away, which of course ends up in the waste system. It would be far better to actually not waste their buying. Clearly, we'll probably see a downturn in certain things. I would suggest because of the cost of living crisis and everything else that's coming up. But clearly, that message and that sort of education element is actually about healthier eating and all that kind of stuff comes into it as well. But also about, as I say, waste minimisation, but not buying it as well.
Great. I have a question, maybe just a concern. We'll see how it turns out. My understanding was that one of the reasons Hampshire weren't currently recycling more of the plastic was that they felt there was not actually any market for it, and so actually basically paying someone to take it away to dump it in the sea. Is that
No, we're not going to do that. No, there is a difficulty at the moment because the markets don't exist for a lot of the plastics that are out there. Clearly, what Gail touched upon within the presentation was a thing called EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. So basically, it's the producers of the packaging are going to be set with the burden of the recycling of that packaging, if you like, the cost. And that's the whole cost, including the collection, the disposal and the processing, if you like. So, and those costs will be shared back amongst the authorities and those people who have to deal with. So it will become an issue for the producers to actually make sure that all of that packaging can be recycled. So they'll only produce plastics that can be recycled, not plastics that can't be recycled. And that's the principle behind EPR, if you like. It's to force the producers to actually fit it. So, the principle's a sound principle. In practice, whether it all comes to fruition and how it works in practice is challenged. But it's no good collecting something for it to be done somewhere. That's clearly what we're trying to put forward.
So yeah, absolutely. Just taking on from what Paul was saying there, obviously there needs to be a drive towards reducing single-use plastic and something that can't be recycled. A reduction overall in plastic use, period. Certainly, you go along the supermarket shelves and you see things that, that nature has produced its own barrier, if you like. Why do you then need to cling film it and wrap it 6 times in unrecyclable plastic? Well, that's ridiculous. Also, there is clearly a drive for ethical recycling. What we would not want to do, I have these discussions through PI, because I'm also on Project Integra board, but also even the counties along the Environment Transport Select Committee or whatever, where actually ethical recycling is that we do not want to see, and I think we've all seen the programmes, we do not want to see our plastics produced or the waste in Eastleigh or anywhere else going to some third world country around the world, etc., because it's convenient for us or any large manufacturer to potentially bail it up and send it on a big container somewhere. It's their problem because it's not ours. And the Environment Bill does say that countries should be far more responsible or more responsible for the waste that they produce. So there will be that's the extended producer responsibility. There'll be a sort of like a tax, if you like, on if you use a plastic, it has to have the polymers in it to a percent to be able to be recycled. Therefore, industry will want it because it's worth them doing it, whereas so much of it now at the moment isn't. And therefore, that will drive change through that process because they'll get taxed so much that it won't be worth putting it in. And that means, obviously, that then means that the business will want to jump into that arena, if you like, because it will be built up as a business case there for them to do that. And therefore, obviously, that means that our waste has to then be dealt with within our own country, which is exactly the right thing to be done. Because obviously, it's ridiculous putting it onto a ship and then sending it around the world. And I certainly wouldn't have want to, and I know nobody else would, but because that is what's been happening. I've seen it where they pulled out carrier bags from this local authority somewhere, not here, and it was on the white sandy beaches of Maldives or something where they bailed up and stuck on their shores, and you think not good. So yeah,
absolutely good. Thank you. Any more questions or comments on that one? Doesn't look like it. Gail touched on this. We need to appoint a rep. We've been offered a space for a nominated rep from PMP. I just sent out an email. I believe the first person to respond was Councillor Kinlock, so I proposed Councillor Kinlock, if anyone's happy to second.
I'm happy, but just for the record, I did respond.
You did, absolutely, and so did Councillor Asman as well, and thank you. And like I say, Councillor was first, so I propose him, but any dissent, happy to discuss.
Can I ask, are the rest of the councillors being asked if they'd like to put their hand up? Because there might be somebody who's not on PMP who might have some expertise.
Rupert's to that question. Rupert. I went the chart correctly.
Oh, is it? Thank you for that, Chair. I wasn't prepared for that one. The other pocket. No. I think we want everyone's input. I think clearly there has to be a conduit, if you like, because if you open it up to the entire council, then potentially it may become quite sort of difficult and cloudy to be able to sort of make those decisions moving forward. I don't think anyone's being excluded, you know what I mean, from the process, but I think there needs to be a conduit to be able to take that through. So I'm sure that Councillor Kinloch or whatever, etc., will be able to take on board people's comments or issues or concerns or whatever they want to bring forward and ideas, and they can also be fed into the process. As I say, it's so yeah, it is a. I'm open to suggestions, to be honest with you, myself person.
Just feels like one councillor is far too few.
I don't know the process. I also agreed to go sit on it as chair of the committee.
Right, okay.
And I assumed there would be some other people because even two of us.
It's two's not enough.
We will be.
I mean, I'm on there because it's my portfolio, so I'll be on there. Richard will be on there.
We will obviously be coming back to this committee
Absolutely.
as well.
Yeah.
And also, our intention is to try and engage with the local areas as well, because clearly people will need to know what's going on and what's being proposed and what the options are.
Okay.
So we are going to try and engage with everybody, but it's how you can do that in the most sensible way. Hopefully that answered it. But
It still doesn't feel enough. If I'm perfectly honest, there's 39 councillors, yes, and so far we've got Dave, Richard, and Rupert, 3 out of 39, and it doesn't feel either representative of the council or sufficient. And I'm going to shut up now. I can't volunteer because I won't be here in May. Some people will be really pleased about that, but that's another story. Oh no, I know. So I just think more than 3 would be a better representation of the council.
Oh, we can look at that. We can look at that. I can assure you, it certainly has not been done.
No, I'm not suggesting it
any
is.
agenda or anything like that, but I totally get the point.
It's quality that counts, Sara.
Sorry?
Quality.
It's quality, isn't it? Yeah, and that's my problem, really.
Okay, well, can we just vote on appointing Councillor Kinloch? There we go. It sounds like we're broadly in agreement that there was a recommendation to Rupert there to other members who are involved and how to engage more broadly as well. Sounds like that's been heard. So, lovely. Thank you for that one, Gail. We'll move on to item 9, which is also being introduced by Gail. This is the domestic waste and recycling policy.
Thank you, Chair. We last updated the waste and recycling policy approximately 2 years ago. And because various changes have been made in terms of how we operate, I think it was really important to update it, but also to make sure it harmonises with our website, and also that it's clearer for our residents. I wasn't intending to go through this in a huge amount of detail, because the changes actually are quite minor. I've listed within the paper from point 8 through to point 17 the changes we intend to make. And I think they relate to bins, bin capacity, collection points, non-collected bins, contaminated bins. Just some of it is changing the language. People don't understand contaminated, so non-collected items, things like that. Replacement bins, making it clearer, and actually telling customers that we're not providing a refund for bulky. We haven't done that for about a year. So it's that people do need to pay for their replacement thing, we need to actually say that actually if there is a non-collected bin, it is 2 o'clock when they can report them, and we will, if there is blocked access, If we can't collect it, we'll go back within at least 2 working days. So it's very much about, explaining to people what we are doing, just making it a little bit clearer. There are no financial implications attached to this, and there's no changes to assisted collections. So from an equality and diversity, the impact is there is an additional impact. And it's just really a question of whether what your feedback is, because attached to the paper is a document with a policy with track changes, so they're all identified what those changes are, and I think I've had very little feedback elsewhere, so it would be really useful to get your views. What else do people collect that? Because I thought it.
It's below, if you don't track it down, if you don't click on the PDF, you just scroll down as you scroll down.
I thought maybe you could actually read it.
I thought it was really useful having the longer campaign.
Yes.
I thought it was really good.
Yeah.
So more of that. Questions and comments on this one there?
Yeah, it's actually fairly, possibly slightly unimportant, but replacement bins. Now, obviously, if I break my bin, that's fine, I should pay to replace it. And if the council breaks my bin, that's fine, they should. But we had an issue in Cllr last week from some chap whose bin had been flattened by a builder. So the issue then is, obviously, it's strictly speaking the builder's responsibility, but catching the blighters doing it is going to be a bit difficult and persuade them to pay even more so. So what does one do then? So should there just be something in there along the lines of, in the event of your bin being damaged by a third party, you discuss it with easily? I don't know how you deal with things like that. What should the householder do?
It is the responsibility of householders to take their bins off the highway once it's been emptied. Not all residents do that, I'll be honest with you. I'm sure you will all know where that doesn't happen. And often people leave them there and then somebody will reverse off and drive into it. And actually that's not our fault, because the person should have put it away off the highway, but it couldn't be damaged or stolen or whatever, because we get an awful lot of this going on. So it is very difficult one to answer, and I think it's what we're trying to do is not open floodgates where people can just ask for a bin and we replace it, because they are costly. It is costly for the council.
And of course, the problem is that lots of people don't get home from work till 5 or 6 o'clock, so the bin's been there for 12 years. So it's a difficult one. I mean, how much does a bin cost to replace? If I had to replace my bin.
The purchase is around about, I don't know the exact figure anymore, but it's about £20 per bin, and then you've got to deliver it, and it's all of that sort of thing. So it's not cheap.
Yeah.
Really. So we would prefer not to. We prefer it the way it is, because they
just leave it
and contact us, and then we can have that discussion on the decisions. But if you put something in there which gives people the option, everybody will have a bin that's damaged by somebody else. I think
that's terrible, cynical.
I'm sorry, I am just cynical.
I think my view, Council, most definitely would be it's responsible of the household. And I think that's our starting point. Now, if we then hear about a very sad tale that maybe makes it reasonable for us to take a different view, then all well and good. But I think if we undertake to replace it, then we might as well.
Well, it's just a blank check, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that was the policy in a previous council I worked for. And the amount of sad tales that came our way, I was in tears most of the time. I think we do have to take the view that it's your responsibility unless we damage it, and then that's the start.
Well, maybe that's what you should say. Is your problem?
We are quite firm, but there are these sort of shades of grey. Because we are, if there is a case, we do look, we do.
You will consider it.
We do consider things.
Gosh, I remember that.
Well, just in parenthesis on that, at the bin room, you could put the bin back where they got it from. That'd be really helpful because they often leave it in the middle of the footpath, the sidewalk, as the Americans would say, pavement or something good stuff. But that was my point. My point was I just scrolled down it quickly. I should have been more diligent in looking at it. But this very helpful email that you get telling you tomorrow's bin day and all the rest of it. It seems to me, I'm not sure, is that covered in this policy?
It's, I don't think it's in the policy, it's on the website.
Yeah, but it is a really valuable service, and I'm quite surprised how many people I have to point it out to.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and also I think it notifies you if there's some change or whatever. Seems to me that's a very powerful instrument also for the conversation we were having earlier, because you could just put in a little snippet, an extra line saying, hey, don't be a naughty boy and put pots in whatever, and just give people little reminders. And I would think it should be a policy to get more people onto that system and for that system to be nuanced and used a little more cunningly.
Yeah, I think that system is really good and it's really helpful to us because when we can't do a service, we can actually email people on that particular round to say what's going on, and that's been really helpful of late when we've had some particular issues. But people have to opt into that service, and I will say a lot of people don't want to opt in. They don't want to sign
I wonder what
up
the
to our
percentage utilisation is. I mean,
the comms team do have the percentage, but it's a really good point because I think the more people that are signed up to my issue, the better we can communicate with them and actually get.
it makes me feel I'm a real VIP. I'm getting a personal notice from Paul Naylor about my bin.
I type everyone personally.
Everyone wants to share their personal information with us, which is why I
Yeah, but if the take up's 20% when it could be 80%, you know, it's something worth working on. I would
Yeah,
thought
no, it
should be
is. The
part of the
comms team
policy.
have got quite hard targets around increasing the use of that.
Maybe we could do something about when we respond to people who say we didn't know or whatever. We could say you could sign up to this and we can give you up to date information.
Does that go to the CSC or does that come into your team?
That comes to us, so maybe we could think about adding that in as a standard part of our responses as well. Just to try and push them to the right direction.
We did do a big push when we relaunched the garden place, and that was actually, you know, we did get quite a few sign-ups to my issue.
Sorry.
So I'm very conflicted about additional bins for children in nappies, because I absolutely see the necessity of it. But at the same time, if we're trying to reduce the amount of waste, we should be encouraging people not to use throwaway nappies. Do they have to actually ask for the additional bin?
They do. Yes, complete a form.
They have to complete.
And they have to provide us with the ages of the children.
Okay, all right. Let's.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I'm trying to get to a point where it's time limited.
Yeah, because it says here it's time limited to 3 years.
Yeah.
Because again, that's been sometimes somebody had it in the child and now they've got grandchildren.
Yeah, 25
same number of bins.
Excellent. Okay.
Can I just say, it was actually one of the things when we were looking at all of this stuff that actually took quite a lot of time with active discussion around this point, because you're absolutely right with what you were saying, but the reality is that where do you draw that line to say, well, no, we're not going to give you extra capacity, but then you then think, well, actually, is that being reasonable?
It's discriminatory as well, isn't it?
And actually, you know, you sort of think, no, probably not. So actually, that's why we then said up to 3 years. Then it would be assessed again if there were exceptional circumstances. Then clearly we would look at that, but they would have to go through that process of you know, being able to do that. And that also works for people who have other needs. You know,
other needs as well. Okay, that's fine.
So, but again, it's sort of trying to tighten that down a bit, but not then make it so prescript or hard that actually people go, well, this is just not a service that I can't use this service. You know. Trying to be fair, but it's trying to be firm and fair. But
I think we should actually be doing a lot more to try and discourage people from using disposable nappies, because you might not realise it, the stuff is absolutely flame-proof that's in them. It's a very good fireproofing. And if you try and incinerate it, it doesn't incinerate.
Probably just as well when you're wearing it, isn't it?
Well, they found this out in the States because they found after several fires there was lots of white blobs about. And they realised what it was and they actually covered a wooden shed in the stuff. And then stood there with a blinking flame going on the thing. And the shed didn't burn. It is absolutely fireproof. It is very hard to get rid of. And that's the problem with it. It really is almost indestructible. I think it's one of those things that we do need to put a bit more effort in because of that. The stuff is indestructible.
So in the next edition of the paper, Borough News, there is an article promoting reusable nappies with a 15% discount. So, so again, trying to start changing behaviours.
But people have got to realise the problems with it. And I think it would be worth checking up on what I'm saying. Because if we can put that in, that these things are virtually indestructible, that it will get a few more people on board.
Yeah.
Just-
We also hope that industry will also drive in the direction of making things a bit more, shall we say, recyclable in that respect, you know what I mean, or the fibres they use and that kind of stuff. Clearly there must be safety guidelines, and perhaps there should be an element of fireproof. I don't know, but as in, clearly, people that, children and babies and things like that, etc. But we hope that industry will drive in the direction of making things more sustainable in the future, and that clearly is obviously something like that. And I know George Fraser, when he was on the council, always used to go on about using recyclable nappies and all that kind of stuff, paper towels, etc., rather than actually going to the shop. But we're just we're in that, our lives, that's the way things go. People just go to the supermarket and pick those things up. So.
I think it's unfortunate, but timing is an issue here, I suspect as well. In these straitened times, you ask a young mum who's struggling, and she says, I don't want to have to put my washing machine on, or even worse, if they haven't got a washing machine, boil pans of water. So it's timing. This is a very difficult period for all of us. And I think for Eastleigh Borough Council to go in heavy-handed, nattering about disposable nappies probably wouldn't be very acceptable right at the present time.
No, but that's why the policy here is reflecting the fact that clearly that's the way that people how they live their lives and want to live their lives, etc. We're just trying to time that.
Just to close this, apologies, it's been alluded to, but there's been a vast increase in individual nappies as well. So I think children's nappies is probably holding pretty stable, in fact, maybe even reducing slightly. Individual nappies massively, because of the amount of care now that's taking place in the whole usage. I think actually there's still a place clearly for people to use reusable nappies, but I think we often lose sight of the fact that the vast increase is around the spectrum.
I should declare a conflict of interest. My daughter-in-law has in her portfolio of products the P&G Pampers.
And are they doing adult recyclable nappies? Just so I'm aware, because I've obviously had children, but I haven't been on the other end of that yet.
Okay.
No. Okay.
We've actually, sadly, my father's in this position, and we researched and we have found nothing to do it. And clearly, it's a totally different set of circumstances.
No, absolutely. It just it was just interesting because I was wondering, as kind of my father needed them when he was dying. Kind of was very aware of the amount of times that is needed. I was just interested, having a child who's used reusable. There is a lot of circumstances that don't make it very nice. Obviously, extra washing, cleaning, that smell. So I was just wondering if there's anything on the other end of life.
Well, that's something that's worth sort of more thought at some point. I had a question around adopted roads, change on page 6, saying that our section vehicles won't go down unadopted roads. I just wondered how big of a change actually is that? How many households will be affected?
I don't know. There is an issue. We do go down to the unadopted roads now, and we're not proposing to change that overnight unless really. There is an issue about going down unadopted roads. We're not insured to drive on them. If we damage those roads, we're not covered for it. Those residents wouldn't be very happy because they're responsible for the maintenance of those roads. There's all sorts of things. There are some authorities, one that I used to work at previously, who will not go down any unadopted roads. They will not collect the bins from those unadopted roads. They're very, very strict on it. We're not proposing that. We're just leaving it in there to give us the option to say, no, we can't come down that road. Again, it's not something we're going to take around tomorrow and go, we're not going to go down any unadopted roads anymore, thanks very much. We'll risk assess it, and if we can go down it, we will continue to do it. If we can't go down it, we can't. There are some, and Andrew mentioned something which we're actually driving over some bridges with our wagons where we don't even know whether it's like bridge can take the weight of the really risky.
The wheels are the width of the bridge.
Yeah, and we can be sued. So if we damage an adopted road, we can be sued, and we find it very difficult to defend. So the costs to us, the risks of using an adopted road are significant. At edges to avoid at all costs, but there are clearly, when we've been doing it for a long time, it's very difficult to change. It's not impossible, but I think we just need to be aware of the risks and the scale of the liability.
As we all know, the county nowadays don't want to try adopt a lot of roads, so we're being very cautious about it.
The Hampshire go down unadopted roads.
No, they won't do any work on another road at all.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, just going on from what Paul's saying, does actually raise an interesting point, obviously maybe not for this particular meeting, but we were talking about, obviously, how bin lorries all over going over unadopted roads, but when going through the planning process, when you look at development briefs, and you see clearly the main spines, if you like, that are clearly made up to the adopted standard that the county, you would hope, would adopt. Clearly at some point they would do that. But then you see quite a lot of the rest of the estate, shall we say the smaller bits, if you like, the closes and bits off, that have nice paved, nice brick paved finishes and everything, which all look great. But the point is that actually it's designing in potentially an issue for services being delivered to people's doors. And actually it looks great and you think it's wonderful, but actually it's potentially a big headache. And I think that that's the sort of thing that, and I don't know how through the planning process you can say, well, hang on a minute, I think there needs to be, you can't just have all of this stuff that is run by a management company and expecting the local authorities bin lorries X amounts of tons to trundle along it and damage it, because that's exactly what will happen. And I certainly know other places in Broadhurst itself where that's already happening, and that's through people's cars, and that's not even or delivery lorries going in there, not our lorries, but delivery lorries going in there, and they're damaging the brick pages sort of thing.
Yeah, I was just wondering the same thing, whether actually if we said to developers, you can have all these roads unadopted, but you're going to have to put your bins somewhere else, might be a bit of a stick, and against this.
And it's not been designed that
I
way,
wonder if that's something for the development management group to talk to planning about, in the absence of anyone else currently talking to them.
Good question to ask.
Certainly, any development we are involved in as a council, we insist that all items are brought to adopted standards. Clearly, that's not the case.
Yeah, definitely. Alan?
Is it just worth considering looking at our standard and saying that we will not go down roads which are not built to an adoptable standard?
We can do. The problem is we're not always sure what standard we go to. And that's why the point Andrew was saying, where we very specifically say with our developments, it will be to this standard. That's where we feel safely going down those roads. But it's those developments where we're not sure historically what standard it's been built to.
Yeah, I can think of a few in Janice Ward.
And so it's very difficult to establish that because you're literally right to have to do
Well, you know, if it's covered in brick pavers and hasn't got any street lighting, it ain't to an adoptable standard for a start.
Sorry, John, I think we need to check the legal position, but I think we could always say we reserve the right not to send our vehicles into these areas.
Okay. Well, my initial question was, it sounds like it's not a massive immediate area like. So fine. Any more questions or comments on that? No one's waiting. Good. Thank you, Dale. Obviously, if you want to stay, you can. But there you go.
Thank you for your time.
Lovely then. Item 10 is local area projects. So this is an update that Duguid's going to give us. The provenance for this item on the agenda was some time ago, Councillor Bourne emailed me, so this might be something we wanted to take an update on at some point, just as they've had some concerns around LAC projects being not moving forward as swiftly as they would like. And I'm sure some of us have experienced similar things on our respective LACs. So Dickon has kindly looked into it and the work that's going on there and is going to give us an update.
And how are we doing for time check? I'll just check. I've got about 9 slides.
I'd like to be done certainly before 9.
Yeah.
But the quicker the better.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Maurice, for giving me a chance to give you this presentation. I'd like to say we've solved the problem entirely, but we haven't yet. So I need to put a very clear health warning on the presentation on the process. But we're working towards a solution, as I'll describe later on. And I'll invite you in a couple of slides' time to just give me a little bit of a flavour of the experience that you've had, perhaps mostly as local area committee members, what the problems and delays might relate to in terms of local area projects. My slides aren't moving at the moment. There we go. So this is just the agenda for the presentation. What the current situation is, how we can move it forward, what the process actually might look like, some of the issues and challenges, and that's the health warning bit. There is a slide about service managers, which we won't spend a lot of time on because that's really for them to worry about, not you, and an indication of how this might roll forward over the next few months into next year. And again, with a health warning, when you might begin to see a little bit of change and projects coming forward a bit more quickly. So over to you for a moment, if I can just invite you and open the floor a little bit, just so that what your view is sort of frame some of the rest of the presentation. What's been the experience from the local area committee point of view about delivery of local projects?
So it's been very slow in India. Having said that, we haven't had any projects in the last few months that I can say that's still the same.
Okay.
So Lawn Road was a disaster, and we know the reasons, some of the reasons behind that, but I think if those reasons were taken out, I still think there was a problem with project availability to deliver it. There haven't been any other projects to actually make any comment on it since then.
The £17 million Section 106 pot, that's presumably across Eastleigh as a whole, but how much of that is devolved to individual local area committees? And how much of that is devolved to Bishopstoke, Fair Oak and Thornton Heath? Because we seem to have had quite a lot of building going on. You're talking to someone from other areas where there's been less building. So I'm intrigued, is money which the BIFO LAC might expect being put elsewhere?
It won't be, no, because Section 106 funds are held by local area committees for that local area. Other councils, I think, operate differently. They don't have a local area structure, and you can have development in one part of the borough being used for a project in a completely different part of the borough, and we don't do that. It's parish by parish, or certainly local area by local area. So that won't be a problem.
So the point then, I suppose, is the percentages that go to individual local area committees, some are going to be much better off than others. So if taking randomly, plucking the straws from the air, if the HEWEB haven't got a lot of money in their section 106 pot, but Bishopstoke, Ferrick and Horton Heath has, then presumably Bishopstoke, Ferrick and Horton Heath can spend it, and the HEWEB just have to build a few more houses.
Yeah, to tell you all about.
Basically. And the other question that's obviously fairly obvious is I was told at a BIFO team meeting yesterday that pretty well all asset transfers are just stopping. So that's obviously going to create issues with things like play areas at Pembers and the Prout Hill developments and all those sorts of places where there are things waiting to be signed over. Quabley Woods is obviously another issue. So that having an ambition for project delivery is great, but if there's no asset transfers, then the wheels are going to come off fairly quickly, aren't they? I would assume.
I think the asset transfer issue is a separate one to the one that I'm dealing with here.
Okay.
There may be a link, I suppose, if you're trying to deliver a project with Section 106 funds ahead of a transfer, but if I can keep the asset transfer issue to one side for now.
Sorry, I've just realised there is a project that we've it's the skate park.
It's going to Sweden.
Yes.
Free space.
Yes, free space. And the last time we had anything about that, the problem was there's no resources.
Right.
But we haven't had an update. I've missed the last.
I thought it was going to be given to transport powers. I think that's funded.
Oh, really? Oh, that's nice.
I don't know if you did.
I didn't know that. No.
We haven't been updated.
Parish doesn't want it.
6 months.
Okay.
That's pretty much.
Janice Ford doesn't want it. You listen to sauce.
We don't want one.
Free space.
Okay, but that is an example where things have slowed.
Right.
We've got a few rolling eyes here, so we better just chuck in a few things from Chandler's Ford. Particularly as we've got several residents sitting in the room. So Alan's got much more experience than me, of course, because he's been involved much longer. But we've had a very successful little project of Flexford upgrade, and that's gone very nicely to time, budget, and everything else, as far as we've been able to work out from our meeting this morning. And we're really delighted with the upgrade. It was a £75,000 project, so it wasn't enormous. The Hiltonbury Lakes has been a more significant.
Don't talk about it.
Checkered history of delays and difficulties and challenges with subcontractors and ground conditions and you name everything else. And, I think fundamentally it's been inadequately resourced. And the person working on it, got the greatest respect and regard for, but I think she's just been pulled in so many different directions. She hasn't been able to manage, control and discipline contractors to the extent that she would like to. And it's rather sad when we have councillors sort of more or less kind of because of not knowing what else to do, having a go at seemingly her. Alan and I have been always pointing out that's not the case. It's resourcing and it's delays and things out of control. And COVID had a big factor in all that as well. And then I'll just throw in one, and I'll come in quickly, and this is just one sentence. We have an abandoned, disused toilet block in Central Precinct, which is an eyesore, and which I promised my fellow councillors when I became chair of the LAC, we would get sorted, repurposed into some use. And it's in a log jam with legal, nobody can find the deeds. I told the parent where to go. I haven't gone scrounging around with the lights in the cellar trying to find the deeds, but I've done almost everything else. We cannot get progress on it, and it's trivial. Compared to Horton Heath or all the other things, it's absolutely trivial, but it's damn frustrating that we can't make any progress on it.
Well, Chandler's Ford doesn't have any developers' contributions or Section 106 stuff because we don't have any development.
So that particular issue, if there's a project you're seeking to get delivered, but it doesn't it isn't a project that's about mitigating the impact of development in any respect, and therefore it can't really use Section 106 contributions. I'm not able to tell you anything about that kind of a project this evening, I'm afraid. But it's both sad to hear stories of dissatisfaction about projects, but for me a little bit reassuring that we have identified the right problem here. That the council has an ambition for project delivery, but things are delayed and deferred, and there's uncertainty, and you as councillors don't know what's going on sometimes, and you're not able to feed that back to residents when they ask you and give you a bit of an ear bashing, what's happening about this, what's happening about that. And there is this issue about revenue-based staff, revenue funded staff, and the way that those resources are in high demand for not just delivery of projects, but other things in the council, delivering statutory services, responding as consultees to planning applications, and so on and so on. The council appears to be capital rich and revenue poor in this sense. The 17 million, I just checked earlier, it's down to 16 million. That's the latest figure. So we're spending money, so that we have less in the pot at the moment. The exact breakdown of that 16 million is one of the key issues that we've been wrestling with for some time, and we are very nearly at the end of construction of a database that we'll be able to interrogate a lot more easily, and will tell us lots of useful things about those Section 106 contributions, such that we can go through this process that I'm about to talk to you about, make best use of that money, find economies of scale, and purpose that money for staff time that will protect that time and give you greater clarity on delivery of the projects. It's actually been the case for a while that corporate projects, as opposed to local ones, are 100% capitally funded. People in the council recharge their time to the project. So the capital pot pays for the time of lawyers, project managers, urban landscape designers, and so on to do the work on that project. So the new approach that we're attempting here is to have local projects 100% capitally funded. So all of that staff time is costed to the project. This should speed up delivery, meet our commitment, a political commitment around infrastructure first, not sort of years lagging behind development, but first and definitely alongside development. Where there is staff time that's currently being used, revenue costed staff time that's being used for projects, there might be a saving there, because we'll no longer be using those staff funding them from revenue, but using the capital pot to do that. We should have a better sense of the projects as they're coming through a pipeline, and what's coming up in the next few, not just months, but a few years, as we attract those funds, design the projects and allocate funding to them, and then prepare them for delivery. The process will see local area managers more as commissioners, and being able to drive projects forward in a way that they wouldn't do otherwise. They have to beg, borrow and steal for staff time. Let's be honest, and this is the reason for the delay, and they spend an awful lot of their time chivvying and chasing. I'm sure you get that message as well. And there's a difference between asking, persuading, cajoling a member of staff to try and prioritise a project, and saying, you've got £10,000 that we allocated to you from the capital pot for this project, and to be honest, I expect value for money from that £10,000 for your time that you've been allocated. It puts local area managers in a stronger commissioning position. And if that time of officers, and if the project resourcing is managed in that way, then there'll be greater certainty about delivery, and you'll be able to resist this. What sometimes happens when local area projects are bumped. There's a big planning application that's come in, so the urban landscape design team have jumped onto that, and they've got to do a response to that planning application. Well, if you're paying the piper, you can call the tune.
Sorry.
So just to clear my mind, I could be wrong. If we're saying that staff time on local projects will be taken, sorry, are we saying that staff time for local projects will come from capital funding rather than, so if, supposing we notionally had a disused toilet we wanted to do something with, and the local area managers spent their time doing whatever local area managers do with disused toilets, that that local area manager's segment of the pay will come from capital funding. So therefore, work that previously a local area committee might have expected to be done as part of the package is now being taken out of capital funding. So that then lessens the amount of capital funding that this local area committee have actually to do something with this toilet, because a lot of the money is being eaten up in staff time that previously would have come out of revenue. So in a way, being a cynic, what's happening is it's effectively sort of an accounting procedure so that the revenue budget is less stretched, so the capital budget can be eaten into. So therefore, and I'm rambling here, but in somewhere like Chlrsford with their toilet, and to be honest, there are local areas who would just love to have a disused toilet, but you know, I'm just saying. But if seriously they wanted to get rid of this toilet, but they don't have any Section 106 money because actually there's been no building going on, where's the Section 106 money for a cash-strapped local area committee going to come from to sort out this toilet if all the work's got to be done from capital point? Yeah. So you see what I'm getting at here? It's another way where fortunate local areas like Bishopstoke and Fair Oak and Horton Heath, there's been loads of building are rolling in money, whereas the unlucky ones who've had no development haven't got any money to spend. So it becomes a bit of a difficult one there, isn't it?
Isn't the challenge here is that capital spending has been held up by the fact that the revenue support staff to deliver them are constrained. So I think the proposal here is not that LSEs cannot spend revenue money on projects. So when they have capital money to spend on projects, they can actually spend it on the staff to deliver it, as well as and not be reliant on the very constrained pool of revenue staff.
So, but then with Chlrsford, if they don't have any Section 106 money to spend, they can still have their work done, but it comes out of the revenue budget, whereas the BIFO, which has lots of Section 106 money, do it out of the capital budget. It just seems somehow, I don't know, it seems a sort of it's obviously an accounting thing, but then that cuts back. In a way, it sort of, in a way, it penalises the BIFO because they've got things that they're doing, which comes out of the capital project, which they might use for other things, whereas Chlrsford, who don't have any capital money, they get it paid for out of revenue. So in a way, the BIFO are being punished doubly for having lots of building.
If BIFO was spending capital, revenue money on a project, they'd fund the staff time from the revenue budget too. They wouldn't be forced to spend capital budget.
But if it's a capital, what I understood from Dickon was if it's a capital project, the staff time is taken out of the capital budget, not out of the revenue budget. Whereas if Chlrsford, sorry, I'm pointing at you, James.
No, that's fine.
But if Chlrsford don't have any capital money, it still comes out of the revenue budget. So the tendency, I just feel slightly uncomfortable, if you like, that what's hitherto been a revenue thing is still a revenue thing for Chlrsford, but it becomes a capital thing for the BIFO. And so the capital pot that the BIFO have is effectively being eaten into, whereas the capital pot that Chlrsford don't have isn't being into it, you haven't got one. So it's just an accounting thing that I feel a bit sort of uncomfortable with.
There is an issue with the process. The key challenge here is to see if we can find economies of scale. You're absolutely right, and be upfront about this. I'm not trying to cover this up. It is a key challenge that if you've got £100,000 for your project, and you need to, and at the moment you can spend £100,000 on the bricks and mortar of that project, and now you need to spend some of that money on the staff time. you're going to have less bricks and mortar. There's no escaping that. I'm not trying to escape from that and cover that up. That is the fact of what we're proposing. The trade-off for you is, do you want less bricks and mortar in a process of certainty and quicker for your communities, or do you want to run the risk of more bricks and mortar, but you don't know when you're going to get it? You're not in control of the process once the project starts. It may be delayed for ages, and you don't have that kind of control. That's the trade-off for people to decide. And the answer to the question, I think, is yet to come, because it relies on economies of scale, and we haven't yet got the final database of all the Section 106 contributions to be able to do that work and see if we can find those economies of scale such that the impact on the amount of bricks and mortar that you eventually get is less.
So what I don't understand, and I don't understand anything that's been said the last 10 minutes, to be fair, is you're talking about the money, but the reality is what has been a hold up for us is availability of staff. Now, if you're saying that by doing it from a different pot, you've got more staff, and what the hell were those staff doing before that meant they couldn't do what we wanted them to do, and where were they all sitting? So for me, moving it around from pot to pot, I really don't care, don't understand, never going to do, and don't worry about it. But we haven't got any more people.
No, but what it does do is increase the envelope for the resource. So because basically all projects will now be 100% funded, and they haven't been essentially been getting a free service you've not been paying for, because the corporate capital projects have been basically kind of funding your projects basically. So because the projects are now 100% funded, your project's 100% funded, we can purchase more resource, or you may choose to go and purchase that resource. There is more money in the project pot for resource, whereas at the moment,
Do you mean external resource?
Yeah, you can go
right, okay,
or you can buy it internally. It's up to you. But essentially, you are buying that research in this resource in the same way the corporate ones are, like that Dickon was saying. So corporate projects are 100%. They pay for every minute of staff time. So when we're building, what we build corporately, think of the thing. When I can't think.
Leisure, places leisure.
Yeah, absolutely. Every minute of the staff time involved in that is funded through the project. So that there's no part of the organisation that is funding that, within our revenue budget. But what was happening with local area projects is they weren't being fully funded, so you weren't paying for all of the staff time, which meant that our resource, our pot of money to provide that service with is smaller than what we need it to be, because only half the pot, so to speak, was paid for the project. So the capital side was funding the corporate side was funding all of the project staff, whereas this way we've got more funding going in, so you can either choose to buy it from the council or you can buy it externally.
By way of an example, I believe the skate park in West End, we had an external project manager on that, and did move forward and did get delivered because we could buy that resource in, and that was a decision we took, that we were happy to spend a bit of that part on actually delivering the project rather than having it sat in a queue.
Or going to Chandler's board that don't want it.
Yeah.
We do want it.
How did you appoint that project manager, Richard? Because that's a resourcing issue in itself. I mean, we've got a parish council with £500,000 of precept and another 150,000 of income from various streams. But, trying to actually organise a beauty parade to appoint a project manager, I would say we're pretty poor at, to be honest.
I believe it was a project manager who was known to the local area manager and who previously worked with the council before. So I think it's battering that network as much as anything, I guess.
Well, network nepotism is only the line between the two.
The name and number.
Can I move this on?
Yes.
Could I just say something, Rich? Because I was trying to get in, because I was trying to sort of clear up a couple of things, trying to be helpful in a long-winded way. I mean, the problem that we had with Hilton B Lakes is we had an officer in charge of it who's got a day job to do. and was trying to do that job as an extra. Now, this to me is what I think. We've then got the flexibility, if you've got Section 106, which we didn't have because that was corporately funded anyway, that those that have got Section 106 now will have the ability to buy in that expertise rather than get in the position which we've been in, where a 1 year job, 3-4 years later, is still not quite finished, which is all wrong. And the other thing that always seems to me about Section 106 monies is, I'll illustrate it in a stupid way. If someone goes and builds a few thousand houses, say on an ex-airfield at Hamble, which we sincerely hope they won't, but if they did, there'd be a lot of money taken for leisure purposes, shall we say. Now, that is taken to serve the people who move into those houses. It would be very hard to justify spending it on, say, Flexford Nature Reserve on the far corner of the borough in the top of Hiltonbury, which is why, in general, when you take Section 106 agreements, the money should be spent in the locality of the development, because it is actually taken to serve the people who are living in those new properties. And that's the principle of it. Unless I've got it wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right, Councillor. So if I can carry on, this is just an outline of the process. So it's a little bit techy, but you can see that you have a role as local area committees in formally allocating the funds to a project, and it's important that there's approval of the specification of the project. And that's a little bit of a change, perhaps. It's really important that people in the council understand what the project is needing to deliver, because only then can we work out what staffing resource is going to be required and how much of a lawyer, how much of a landscape designer, and so on. Because that then feeds into the calculations that we'll need to do, and finding those economies of scale, which, as I said earlier, will minimise as much as possible the amount of capital money that gets spent on staff time. If I can put it this way, if we can identify a pool of projects or a wave of projects, as I've called them here, that are all similar types of projects, then you can have staff working on those projects. And rather than just looking at it project by project, you can say, well, we'll recruit someone to work on 5 countryside projects next year, or we'll recruit a landscape designer to look at these 6 skate parks. And there we can try and find some economies of scale, because it's not just one project manager spending time on one project, but they're looking at a collection of projects, and hopefully there'll be efficiency there. I'm not going to take you through that, but just to reassure you that there is a process here that we've mapped out. We're going to sort of road test it when we've got a bit more information. I can take members through this. Please don't try and look at it. You will go blind.
I'm not a flow chart, mate.
That bottom box.
But it basically sets out in more detail what the previous slide says. And there's some spreadsheets there which begin to capture how much resource is going to be required by different members of staff, and then looking at those across all of the 5 areas, and then being able to look at the whole picture and then say, right, we think we need to recruit this amount of a countryside officer, or this amount of a lawyer, or this amount of an urban landscape designer. Get those people in place, then we understand a set of projects, we've got a set of staff, we can then press the go button and start delivering those projects. But it does require coordination, and that's what this process is designed to do. So there are issues and challenges. We need to understand the pot, and that's work which is very nearly finished now. A lot of really good work has gone on with that, and so we're nearly there. We need to have projects scoped out and able to say how much of each type of staff they need, what expertise does each project need, because then that feeds into the that spreadsheet which looks across all of the different projects. It is project initiation document, so that's a really useful part of the project process, where you specify what your deliverables are from that project and what the deliverables aren't, what's out of scope as well as what's in scope. Really useful and important to control the project as it's being delivered. But it also crucially will set out how many hours of a lawyer, how many hours of a countryside officer and so on are required. And if we know those numbers for that project, and we know those numbers for a set of projects, we put it all together and we know in total how much time is needed of a countryside officer or whatever. Less funding for infrastructure. This is the honest trade-off that you will need to consider. There's another challenge there in terms of estimating the staff resource accurately. It's not something that we've had to do. Some teams are really good at it, but there are some which will be quite immature, and we'll have to get better at that really quickly because we don't want to obviously get to halfway through a project and find that we haven't staffed it adequately. So there is an issue and a challenge there. Implication service managers, I said I wasn't going to go through. I'm happy to talk to members outside of the meeting in more detail about any of this. And I think this is the final slide. Yep. So we're finishing off assembling that database. The development management team with case managers are doing that, doing a really good job. We will have some more engagement with local area managers and your committees and your chairs, as well as other people, service managers. We've started the process. I gave this presentation to executive heads a while ago, just to get their initial feedback. If it goes ahead, then we need to be writing those project initiation documents. Your local area manager is key to that. Might need some help from some project managers to do that and other people, but it is a precursor. We can't really move forward through that flowchart, through that process without those project initiation documents and setting out how much staff time each project needs. We can identify a collection of projects that are then able to go forward. Then service managers can start recruiting, buying in more project managers, more countryside officers and so on. And then we can start delivering those projects.
That's a very quick and simple question. When you refer to Q3 and Q4, are you referring to the electoral year or the calendar year?
Or financial year. Financial year. Yeah, so April to March.
That's really useful to hear. Thank you, Token. I think that, well, I like the idea of these changes insofar as it will be nice to have some predictability and reliability around projects. I suppose absolutely take Steve's point around the slight loss of funding. It's effectively loss of the subsidy that's currently going on in the project team. And the best elephant in the room is that we've got this money sat here, it's not being spent, and actually inflation is taking it away from us anyway, so we may actually win by getting it spent quicker.
They also time out, so initially are able to spend them.
So I'm quite comfortable with having.
Just one other thought, and I do get them occasionally. One of the problems that I used to see from my cabinet perspective, and I think I still see it happening quietly, is that LACs will have projects. An LAC will have a new country park. They don't allocate any funding for the upkeep of that country park afterwards and the ongoing staff time it's going to take to monitor it and maintain it. And I think that's still something I'd like to see put into projects at times, that people realise you have an ongoing project. You've got an ongoing cost that's going to be there for years and years to come. And if you're in an LAC like Janice Ward, where we're broke, that's where we hit the problems, because we can have projects, but there's no way we can take on any extra expense to maintain them. And it's happened before, and it'll happen again, unfortunately. But I can see it happening in other LACs now, which are cash rich. Then the development stops, your income stops, and you've got a lot of assets which are now going to take a lot of upkeep, and you haven't set the money aside. So I don't, and that's because just.
Anyone? So there's not a cabinet decision on this. It's because it's largely operational.
It's at early stages, as I said, and I think we need to look at that database and reassure ourselves that economies of scale are viable.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I couldn't recommend a process that sees your capital pot slashed in half, 50%. 50% on staff time, only leaving you half of the money for the actual product, the actual infrastructure for the community. So we need to see what that percentage is. Is it 10%? Is it 5%? I'm hoping it's at that order. 16 million pounds sounds like an awful lot of money that wouldn't all need to be spent on staff, or even 80, even 20 or 30% of it. But we'll see.
Yeah, great. I think we need to note this clearly of interest to the panel and to wider members on early season things, see how it goes. And if it's not working for us, I think we need to bring it back and have another discussion. Seeing some nods. So let's consider that noted and we can move on. Thank you, Dickon. Again, you don't say if you don't want to. That takes us on to item 11 then. We're nearly there. The new housing policies. I'm going to ask Sue, who's been so patiently waiting the whole meeting, just to talk us through this item. Thank you, Sue.
No problem. I'll give you a little bit of background. The reason the report's come here is that last year, EC Borough Council became a registered landlord. So we are now in a position where we can own affordable and social rented properties. And to do that and to do it properly and to protect the HRA, which is the revenue account that affordable money will go into, you have to have certain policies in place to actually, one, to be compliant, but two, also to make sure that staff and the council know what they need to do to keep these properties repaired, tenants in them, sustainable communities and all the rest of it. There is a lot of policies that need to be developed before we own any properties, and I think the post office will be the first sort of site where we'll have some affordable properties coming in, and that's moving relatively on time. So this is why the timings means that we've got to get about 4 or 5 policies into each meeting, but this I'll go on to the recommendations and what we've sort of talked about. So what I've tried to do, a lot of the content that goes into these housing policies is housing law or it's government, it's statutory. So I've highlighted parts where it's sort of discretional, where the council can choose whether they want to do it. So it could be that we don't have sensitive lettings policy, but it makes sense to have a sensitive lettings policy. So therefore, that will be coming up on another tranche of policies. So, it's difficult because you have to have a lettings policy and all the rest of it, but you can have sub policies that link to that. So this is where the sort of joy comes. The policies that I've sort of set out for this meeting was the allocations policy. The allocations policy, in summary, is very, very linked to Hampshire Home Choice, which is the choice-based lettings that the housing team use at the moment. And so just like any other RP in the area, we would be nominated people to our properties when they come up. So we are very, very linked to that at the moment. And that policy, it will say this needs to be read in conjunction with the Hampshire Home Choice Framework and you will notice that all of these policies are very linked to other policies. I've written them so that the complaints policy is very linked to the corporate one. We have to be very sort of careful with this because residents now can go to the Housing Ombudsman if they're not happy with our complaints procedure and the procedure's been all gone through, they can go directly to the Housing Ombudsman. So it's a slightly extra bit that the corporate complaints policy doesn't have. So it's things like that that, we have to be aware of. The compensation and redress policy, that is a bit more discretional because the amount we pay and what we might pay. So say we didn't go out and repair a leaking radiator, so they had no heating for 3 days or whatever. I'm just kind of making this up. Would we compensate them for, and I am playing devil's advocate here, but this is because Dickon was chatting to me about it. But if it was, say, an elderly couple, would we pay for their extra electric that they've had to plug in for a heater, or would we buy them more jumpers or whatever? So, you know, it becomes quite difficult to know when to stop. So that
Well, in that
policy,
case, will be prioritised getting it fixed within a day, like SSE do,
yeah.
because they've got these categories of vulnerability.
Absolutely, and this is where the right to repair comes in, because the right to repair is a legal requirement. So they do have, I don't know, say if you have a child under 1, you have to have your heating repaired within, like you say, 24 hours, or, you know, they have a category of repair. So the point I'm trying to make is that when you read the policies, make sure that the highlighted bits are the bits that we have a bit of discretion over. The rest, really, we're having to do as we're told. We have to be compliant with it. Because of this, we need obviously to have the policies consulted on and checked, and legal does look at them, but we do need to have a governing body and a way of getting them through to cabinet, and that's where the recommendations lie. It's slightly different now, isn't it, to what is in the report? So I think we're going to go with Councillor Duguid, yes, with your...
Well, trustee colleagues, I mean, I think what we've said is that the Port and Heath task and finish group's got one more task to do, but then that group would then, and Janice as well, if willing, that we would then pick up this mantle, and where we studiously analyse these projects of policies and documents, make suggestions to you, and then either bring them here for not necessarily rubber stamping quite, or for points of conflict, and then that being able to be taken to cabinet. I think that's more or less what we're talking about.
Yeah. So for background, the default position would be, because they're going to cabinet, they come here. There's a lot of them, and they're coming every month. I don't think it's necessarily a good use of our time, just because they're quite detailed and operational in many ways. They're not the strategic documents we used to see. And the original recommendation in the report is that we've used the housing working group, which is largely A&R's group, to look at these policies, but I just don't think it's really within A&R ballpark. They're more concerned with risk and finance. So the proposal is we use what's currently the one Port and Heath task and finish group, which knows a lot about housing now, roll that over, and it becomes the housing policy task and finish group, just to take a bit of a look at these things, and then we don't need to spend too much time in our formal meeting.
So actually, we're extending our remit over a further period of time, as well as, okay.
Not just cramming.
Yes, because I'm just thinking we've got one more meeting left, but then we'll continue on that. Right, okay.
With a new agenda,
new agenda, new terms of reference, etc.
And due to the timings and having to diarise them to fit, that if you did decide that one needed to come to the P&P panel, they are monthly meetings. So I just wanted to make sure that you were happy with that. Can be done by Teams or whatever, because I will send you the policies out prior to the meeting, and they will have track changes like we saw before, and then we can just talk over Teams about it. So if you're happy with the sort of monthly meetings, then I can diarise and.
Steve being a county councillor and being is in very heavy demand, so it's timetabling
is the issue.
I think you're saying you can fit it in, but you're not at the drop of a hat. We can't sort of be told you've got to be at this meeting in 1 week's time on Teams or anything else, because we're all. Steve's got a.
I won't feel offended if I have to miss a meeting.
But the beauty of there being 4 of us is we can drop one out.
There's always going to be 3 available at least.
Hopefully there'll always
and you could always email, if you've got a particular comment or something.
Yeah, usually as a chair of a meeting, I'd then have a little chit chat with you and say, hey, this is what we're planning to do, because that's just being courteous to people.
The only other thing that we were asked, I think was it from Laura, was terms of reference. So if your group's already got terms of reference, that would be great, because we could.
It wouldn't cover
this.
It sounds like I think we've discussed the terms of reference. We'll put some terms of reference in the minutes.
Okay, brilliant.
And how long do we see this going forward? Because if this is going to be a year's worth of work, then I'm not sure I'm the right person to be there for them.
Well, the main bulk, the essential policies, we're looking to get most of them ready for Bampton House, because they will apply to Bampton House as well. But then we've got some coming over late next year, maybe early 24. So they should all have gone through by summer.
But it's an occupational hazard, and I'm up for re-election. in
Yeah,
May.
you'll get in.
I wish I wouldn't.
I think from a learning perspective, because the thing is, you learn, don't you?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. If you're happy with that, that's fine.
The only other thing that you'll find in these policies is that there's lots of the compliances around tenants being involved in the future writing of the policies. So there may be on that group, whoever's on that group, tenants on that group as well. So it's just to sort of forewarn that, you know, that's the way it's moving forward, is that we have to involve the tenants.
Okay, that's very good. Very good then. So I think we'll take that as agreed because everyone was nodding. So I think that's the way we'll go forward. There was a tranche of policies on the agenda tonight, which we nearly got across. I didn't really want to discuss in any detail. I suggest if there's comments on those to email Sue directly.
Absolutely, yeah, that's. You don't have to, because if you comment on the document, it will automatically email me to tell me you've commented. So it's up to you how you do it. I don't mind either way.
PDF.
Yeah, it won't do. It won't.
Oh, sorry. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry. That's me not knowing that. Oh, right. Okay. Yes. If you want me to amend or you know, explain or whatever, then yeah, definitely just email me.
Okay, item well done. Thank you so much for bearing with us.
Rush through it.
In a lovely meeting. You're welcome to. You've come this far.
See out the end.
We'll do items 12 and 13 together as we usually do, which is cabinet forward plan and our own work programme. I didn't see anything on cabinet forward plan that isn't already coming or is of interest. For our own work programme, there are three things I noted during the meeting. One is that if we haven't already, February, you've got some waste changes coming through cabinet. Apparently.
Yeah, I've emailed Sue to ask what exactly, but I just put waste.
Okay. I wondered if we want to program in air pollution statistics, perhaps. Oh, that March for that, I reckon.
That's the latest one in the year.
Yeah, that's what's good. And then I wondered if we wanted a little more of a dive into noise complaints and the process and some statistics on how they're being resolved. Something that came up. Yeah, I think we've got space probably somewhere. Probably will be busy later with budget.
Yeah, we don't really want anything else on February, and there's already 50.
Should we put it in our table of other things to think about? Well,
what you could do is, since we want yet another task to finish with, because you could have a very quick bit of the meeting and make it the planning one where you just almost set it going, and then it will come back. So you don't need to have a debate here until you've done the work, but that would be yet another quick.
Let's put this under items anticipated, and once we have some other tasks and finish wrapped up, we can come back to it.
I'd still like to put my regular vote in for something about street parking. Will Hampshire take it over?
Oh, yes. We had that, didn't
We
we?
did, okay. Last time talking about the highways agreement, was that?
Well, I'm just I'm curious to know what is likely to happen next year when Hampshire take street parking enforcement away from the borough.
Yes.
Because obviously there are going to be, one assumes, fairly serious implications for places like Fair Oak, because one would assume that Hampshire will be concentrating on Eastleigh Town Centre, where the money could be made, rather than making it
What's likely, to be fair, I mean, what Cornelius finds is what they tend to do is they kind of all arrive apparently on mopeds, they'll attack a whole area in one go, and it's those areas where they're going to have the biggest bang for their buck. And I think you do have to be prepared that an awful lot of our WO lines and our other enforcement will not be enforced.
Yeah. And I would just like to have a discussion about that with people who know, if that makes sense, because it's proving increasingly difficult to keep residents even remotely happy with parking out in Fair Oak or anywhere else for that matter. And I just have a strong suspicion that things are going to get a whole lot worse.
If we can't fix it as a PvP item, we need to remember this briefing.
Yeah, there's no reason why we can't. Councillor Broomfield's absolutely right. Expect a very different level of enforcement. I mean, non-existent in a lot of the boroughs. That's what's happened elsewhere, and they will focus on the bits where they can make them. Because that's what they do elsewhere. It's tried and tested. So a lot of the TROs we have in place, I think it's fair to say the chances of those being enforced are minimal. But in terms of, we've got some data on this. We've got folk who've done a lot of work on it, so we can bring that back. And of course, as we get closer to the time, we'll have more refinements on that. So we'll do that.
We'll work out how to bring that back. Thank you for the reminder, because I thought we had programmed it.
I'm wondering if there's a presentation that might not be here.
Right. Yeah, but we'll work out how to get everyone up to speed on that. Good. Any other comments on work programme? Awesome. Thank you for your time tonight and your contributions. And I will...
Can I just say well done for getting this done by about 2 minutes past 9?
I think that's thanks to Sue. A very